Cyber sovereignty and how it affects access to different versions of history. What is cyber sovereignty? It's the idea that governments have a right to control what parts of the internet are accessible within its borders. The key focus of cyber sovereignty is censorship, the control, supervision, suppression of what can be accessed, published, and viewed on the internet. On a small scale, this can look like Facebook being blocked at a high school computer network. In Australia, certain sites involving piracy are blocked. A pretty great example of cyber sovereignty and censorship in action is China's IT infrastructure. So, let's look at China. You may have heard of the Great Firewall of China. Essentially, China's been restricting and censoring what is accessible on the internet since 1994. The firewall analyzes and blocks content from overseas, slowing down what comes in through the border and blocking what the government has decided is content against their wishes. Sites like Facebook and Google are blocked, along with many Western news outlets like the New York Times and Bloomberg. What does this mean beyond social media, and how does it affect its access to history? So the negative effect is quite clear, because we have a case where citizens cannot access their own history when their history is located on blocked sites. A key example of this is access to information on the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Also, news sites that contain information about the Chinese government that is considered defamatory are blocked. These contents could include recounts about the protests of 1989, for example. When we look at countries using their cyber sovereignty to suppress and control historical recounts, the internet's intersection with history is a negative one. It's not all negative though. The colonial history of China means its artifacts are scattered in museums around the globe. In China, the Smithsonian and the British Museum websites aren't blocked. The British Museum, for example, has hundreds of Chinese artifacts in its collection. These include a very rare and historically significant collection of Buddhist paintings. A user can search the British Museum collection on its website and access high-quality images of these paintings remotely. This is a great example of how digitization of history, done correctly, enabled by the fact that the Chinese government has not banned access to the site. Essentially, the digitization of history intersects with censorship in a really interesting way. On one hand, citizens can access artifacts they wouldn't be able to in their home countries, like stuff stolen by the British during colonial times. However, this can only happen when the websites these archives are hosted on are not blocked by the public's government. When nations use their cyber sovereignty to censor certain sources, we can have a problem. We see citizens having a disconnect and a lack of access to their histories, being further negatively affected by colonialism and erasing the past of their nation. Further than this though, and much more scarily, if we cannot access independent sources or varieties of sources about our own history, there is a potential for it to be consciously and deliberately rewritten.